I want to thank Parker Arts for the opportunity to speak to all of you. This is a really important topic. This can also be a little bit of a divisive topic and sometimes a difficult conversation. So I appreciate the opportunity to hear our side of it, understand as someone with lived experience what it means to be incarcerated, what that means for your family generationally, and what the recidivism rate means really for the US today, and ways that we can impact that and maybe improve things. I want to thank Katori because she came in my shop about a year and a half ago, and invited me to come and give this speech and to speak to all of you. And that meant a lot to me to have that opportunity. Since then, I've had an opportunity to go around and speak at different colleges and high schools and junior high schools and prisons and talk about the same issue and mainly tell my own story. My story is, I think, fairly compelling. It's not necessarily the most interesting story out there, but I think the opportunity for me to turn around my life and really be at a place in my life now today where the most important thing to me is Convict Coffee, is being able to get out there and make some change in the world, has resonated with people. I think all of us would like to be able to impact things. There's some other people, if you'll indulge me for a second, I want to thank my son Daniel and my son Damien. When I had this crazy idea, it was Christmas Day 2023, and that was the day that I got sober. For most of my life, I had a problem with drugs and alcohol. I overconsumed. A lot of that was trauma-based using. I came from a very violent home as a young person, and so I consumed drugs and alcohol for most of my life. And that was the day that I got sober. It was also the day we thought of Convict Coffee Company. And as you might have guessed, most people thought I was pretty insane, right? I got a lot of wellness checks. You're going to open a company and call it Convict Coffee in Parker, Colorado, you know? I'll try not to swear too much, but I also want to be historically accurate. So my ex-wife called me one day in the car. She was doing some printing for me, and she's like, "Are you out of your fucking mind?" Because I'd sent her all these shirts to print, and they said Convict Coffee on them. So, we felt very strongly that we were doing the right thing. We felt like this was something that needed to be talked about. It's something that could move it forward. And you learn a lot about who really has your back when you make a huge stride like that, a step away from what you've been. And to have both of my sons step in and literally build the whole shop with their own hands, spend every penny that we had down to $400 in the bank the day we opened, $70,000 in credit card debt, and to open Convict Coffee and have them stand with me and do that meant a lot to me. I want to thank my daughter, Jaden. I got sober on Christmas Day, and so much of that had to do with her and my want to be a better father for her. She and I were a little bit estranged at that time, and since then, really so proud of you and happy to have you back in my life. So I appreciate you guys indulging me for this because it's a really important thing to me. And lastly, I always brag that we have never lost an employee in the year and a half, 2 years we've been open. I'll speak to you guys a little bit about why that is. We believe in pay equity and paying our people well and providing pathways for people to move themselves forward. But I want to thank my team at Convict. We have incredible people that work for us, and we would not be where we are. They put up with a lot for me, I promise you, to get this going. So thank you guys. So this presentation is very different for me. I'm usually telling my life story, and I'm going to try really hard not to get too deep into that. I'll probably weave some of it throughout as I speak about different things that are going on within our system today. But I think it's really important just for the fact for you to understand where I'm coming from, what my lived experience is. You just really understand, like, why am I up here talking about this? Why is this the cause that I've chosen? Why are we pushing it so hard at Convict Coffee to have this conversation and to raise money for different charities associated with reducing recidivism? So, long story short, I'll try to keep this piece pretty quick. But I was born in the Bay Area. I was raised by two parents who both struggled with drugs and alcohol. My house was pretty violent. Of the 4 children that were in that house, I'm the last one standing. The other 3 all had issues with drugs and alcohol and all lost their lives young because of that. And, I feel very fortunate to be able to sit here and talk to you guys today. And when I'm telling my story, it's not always a great story. There are not a lot of heroes in the story. But for me personally, I think it's really important that I come from a place of gratitude. Because whatever my story is, There are hundreds of thousands of people out there today right now serving time in prisons with much more intense stories than I lived through. And I think we need to be just respectful of that and be aware and keep perspective, as I speak through some of these things. My house was very violent. At the age of 6, my mother tried to kill me. She cut my wrist, and I have a scar on my wrist from that day. And I remember my sister driving me to the hospital to get stitches and screaming at me the entire time in the back of the car, "You can never tell anyone Mom did this. Dad will kill Mom. You cannot tell anyone that this happened." And the reason I bring that up is that when you drive by a home and you see this nice, kind of normal looking house, you never really know what's going on inside that house until you go inside and dig. And we were a pretty normal looking family from the outside, but in our house, there was a ton of violence. There was some sexual abuse. There was a ton of drug and alcohol abuse. And typically what you find is those things are generational and they roll forward. And some of what I'll talk about today will point out some of those facts. For me, I started getting arrested at the age of 13. I was carrying a gun at 12. In and out of incarceration from the age of 13 until the age of 22. And I got really, really fortunate because when I was in prison in Vacaville State Pen in California, I got a note that I was going to be a father. And my son Damien, who's here tonight, was born while I was serving time in Vacaville. And I don't know that there was anything else that could have pulled me out of kind of where I was going. I did not intend to live very long at that time. But knowing that I was going to be a father, knowing that my son was being born and I was behind bars, and being in a state of forced sobriety, that you have that rare opportunity sometimes in prison where someone is not using drugs, that uses drugs every day. And by the way, I used drugs every day for a long time, right? So knowing that that was coming was something that jarred me really hard. And I have letters that I wrote back to my father, who was at the time a fugitive. He had 8 DUIs, and he had ran a police officer over drunk for his 8th DUI. And he'd chosen to flee the state of California, and he was living in a trailer up in Oregon. And so I would write letters to my mother, and she would send those to my father. And those letters were very much, I am going to be there for my son. I'm going to figure this out. I'm not going to be like you. And I'm going to break this cycle that we're talking about, right? We're not going to continue this. I'd love to tell you guys that I got out of prison and all of a sudden I was this perfect person. That was absolutely not the case. I continued to use drugs. I continued to drink. But I stopped getting arrested. I stopped being violent. I stopped carrying weapons. I was perfect through my parole. I had some level of support through that process that made that possible. And a lot of guys that get out of prison today don't have that level of support. So I was very fortunate to have people around me that helped me get through that. I busted my ass and I worked really, really hard. And I, grew up in the restaurant industry and had a really successful career. I was, within 6 years of release, I was vice president of Applebee's. I'd opened 1,000 restaurants with them. I went on to be CEO of Illegal Pete's and Chiba Hut and vice president of Rock Bottom Brewery, and did a lot of really, really good things in that industry. People that get out now don't have it as good as I did. There was no Google when I got out. I'm old, right? There was no Google when I got out of prison. So people that get out now, you can just type their name in, right, and find out. There's background checks. There's a lot of things I'm going to talk about policy-wise in a little while that could change, that could make things better. But I personally was very fortunate. I had that opportunity to start fresh, go to work as an employee, and grow to become vice president of a company and feed my family and do okay financially. Throughout that whole time, I drank and used. I didn't realize until I was about 53 years old that I had a huge issue with alcohol. And I was using alcohol and drugs really to drown the trauma that was going on in my mind that went all the way back to the abuse that we endured when I was kids and a whole bunch of other things after that. I went through a couple of different marriages, blew through those like a bull in a china shop, right? Those poor women. Very difficult kind of human being to be around, very angry, carried a lot of rage. And I also had this problem that led to Convict Coffee. And the problem was I was not aligned with the purpose of the companies that I worked for. I worked for companies that their sole purpose was to make rich assholes richer, right? Make millionaires into billionaires. That was the goal. While employees are sleeping in cars, these guys are building mansions. And so I was going home every day after work feeling no purpose whatsoever, just consuming as much as I could to kind of get out of my head what I had to do to take care of my kids, but not something that I personally got any satisfaction out of. And so for the first time in my life, I got fired at 53 years old on November 30th. And I decided to see how much alcohol I could possibly drink. And for 24 days straight, I drank a whole bunch of alcohol. And my daughter was coming over for Christmas morning. And that day I decided that I was going to quit drinking. It's very, very hard. And I will throw some hope and encouragement to those of you out here who may have people in your family that suffer from addiction or that are in and out of incarceration. There is hope. There is a way out. But I will tell you, it takes a lot of work, and I had to dig really, really deep, get therapy. AA helped me a lot. Southeast Christian hosts AA meetings over there, and I was able to walk in there off the street the day after Christmas because I was one day sober and I wanted to drink so bad, and have a group of people like embrace me and bring me in and hear my story and help me. And I'll tell you, I cried like a bitch in front of 50 people that never had met me. And I went through things and I told them stories. The story I just told you about my mother, I'd never said that out loud for 40 years. And so I got some of that stuff off my chest and I was able to move forward. And then I decided I have to do something that actually makes a difference, because I cannot go on and just spend my life making rich people richer. That's not what I want to do with my life. And to have the support of my family and be able to do what we're doing now, it means a lot. So enough about me. I promise you I'd keep that short. This is what we're here to talk about today, recidivism. And recidivism is an interesting thing. It is the return to prison, the return to jail, being rearrested. And the interesting thing about it is that different states and different countries measure it differently. So for some countries, it means you were rearrested. For some countries, it means you were put in jail. And so getting good data of how the U.S. performs on the world stage is challenging. I'm going to show you some a little bit later. I can tell you, we're not great. We could be better, right? So when you compare us to some other countries, there's some real opportunity for us to improve there. I think, what my goals are for this is to really explore, like, what is recidivism? How does it affect our society and families? Why should we care, right? Because I know there are people out there that are like, they did the crime, let them do the time. And I want to make an appeal to you to consider some different data as we talk through why it's important for all of us to care about reducing recidivism, what it can do for our society, beyond the fact that these are just human beings that are suffering, that need some additional help. I've been told I have an hour to present, so I'm going to do my darndest to stick to an hour. And then I'll open it up for about a half an hour of questions, if anyone has any questions. So take a look at that slide, because it really should grab your attention. The U.S. is about 5% of the world's population. But right now, we're about 20% of the world's incarcerated population. So the land of the free has an incarceration problem, right? We know today that we incarcerate people at a much higher rate than most civilized countries in the world. We are, Convict coffee, interesting name, certainly meant to grab people's attention. People are like, why did you call it second chance coffee? Because no one would give a shit, right? But I want to be really clear here. We're not anti-law enforcement. That's not our goal here. Our goal is to reduce crime, but to do that through providing opportunities for people versus strictly incarcerating. So, we understand that there is a need for some people to be incarcerated that are violent, that are repeat offenders, that maybe, have issues that cannot be corrected. But we think in most cases, people have hope, and there's opportunity to reform them and have them go out and be successful and be contributing members of our society. I want to highlight some of the challenges of our court system. And, I want to start by saying, I love our country. I'm proud of our country. When I'm talking about these things, I think we can do better. We should strive to do better. But these are some things that you may not know sitting here today if you haven't dug into these facts. Today, between 70 and 80% of people that are in a county jail have not been convicted of a crime, right? So innocent until proven guilty. But until we prove you guilty, you're going to be behind bars. So the main reason that those people are behind bars and some other people aren't, the only reason in most cases, is money, because we operate on a cash bail system. So while some people can get arrested and have the opportunity to write a check and say, I'm going to be released right now and I'm going to go fight my case on the outside with a really good attorney. And I'm not going to walk into court in an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs and skew the jury if I choose to go to a jury trial. Some people have to fight their case from behind bars. The conviction rates for people that fight their cases behind bars are between 13 and 24% higher than for the conviction rates that people that are able to make bail. So it's a real problem, right? The 93 to 97% of all cases get pled. Someone cops a plea and agrees to take a charge. I don't know if you guys know what that means, but most cases don't go to jury trial. So when we say you've been convicted in the US by a jury of your peers, that's like 3 to 5% of all cases that happen in the US. Almost all cases are pled out ahead of time. I can tell you that the additional time you serve behind bars fighting your case versus being on the outside fighting your case is much more likely to make you go ahead and accept that plea bargain. It might not be good for you. And then once you're in the system, whether you get a short sentence or a long one, you're on probation, you're on parole, and you're way more likely to reoffend and then back inside. A couple other things, returning to prison on a parole violation. We talk about, again, a jury of our peers. That's not needed when you violated parole. You just need to have the parole officer be satisfied that the preponderance of the evidence is that you are needed to go back to prison. So in other words, you can get out, be doing well, stumble, maybe miss some appointments, maybe have a dirty test, and you can have a parole officer decide that you need to go back to prison without going back through the system. And so in that way, you see many cases of recidivism start from there. In 1970, and I was a little baby back then, 161 people per 100,000 in the US were incarcerated. Today, that number is 541. So it's almost 4 times, right? So I want to dive into really how that happened, because I can tell you guys, it wasn't accidental. It was pretty intentional how that happened. So today, I want to touch on this number, but then I want to explain it a little. Today, about 5.4 million people in the US are either incarcerated or under supervision, meaning probation or parole, right? That number was taken at the end of 2022. That number was 1 day, right? So at that moment in time, the way that we used to track that number was using a full year worth of data. So if you were to take that same number and look at the year of 2022, that number is really more like 7 million. So a lot of times, if you play with data, you'll start to notice that things are presented in ways that are in the best interest of the people that are presenting them. To say like, oh, things are getting better. Actually, that number is pretty stagnant to the highest point we've been in the US, right around 7 million people in the system. You can see the prison and jail piece, the probation or parole, which again is going to very likely increase the chance they're going to go back. And then this is coming straight from the Bureau of Justice. And again, that's that 1 day number. So how did that happen from 1970 to now being 4-fold the number of people that are incarcerated? Again, it was intentional. So the very first thing I want to touch on is what I call tough on crime politics, right? It's very, very hard for a politician to come out and say, I want to help people that are incarcerated. I want to give more programs to people that are behind bars. You're much more likely to be elected by saying, I am tough on crime, put these guys away, right? So that shift that happened really fed a whole bunch of the changes that happened over the next 50 years, right? It wasn't like it just happened on accident. People made that commitment and said, we're gonna get elected this way. So how do we change that? The people in this room have the opportunity to change that. You know, instead of buying into what is a lot of times hyperboil and things being pushed out, it's how you choose to use your vote and to really pay attention to how people are impacting things like incarceration and recidivism rates. The other big thing that happened really started in the 70s and really escalated in the 80s, the war on drugs, right? So before the war on drugs, drug addiction was a health problem. After the war on drugs, drug addiction was a criminalized, we took the approach that it was a criminal act, right? And so many people are behind bars since that started, primarily because of nonviolent drug offenses. About 60% of people that are locked up are what would be called violent offenses today. There's a significant number that are not, and a lot of those people are for drugs. So the war on drugs really filled the jails up quickly. Mandatory minimum sentencing kicked off, and judges really lost the flexibility to use their own judgment based on context. Laws required fixed prison terms. You guys remember the 3-strike rule when that happened? So a lot of people that got 3 felonies ended up doing life. Before that, they would have not done that. So you saw those numbers extended. And then once people were in, they tended to stay much longer. More behaviors became crimes, more laws were written, and we started to fill up the jails and the prisons. So again, from 161 people per 100,000 to 541 people per 100,000 today. The last one, well, I've got 2 more, but this one is a really important one. Let's see if I can make this work here. They usually don't let me touch computers, guys. Like I said, I was around in 1970. Racial and economic inequality. So a black man in the US is 5 times more likely than a white man to be incarcerated. But they are a much smaller percentage of the US. They're about 14% of the US is African American, but they represent 41% of incarcerated people in the US. It is not your race that is going to determine that you're going to be incarcerated. It is the systemic processes that exist, whether it is how policing is done in different areas. I'll use a good example, but stop and frisk, right? Much more likely to be used on a person of color than on a white person. Different sentencing, predisposed bias of people on juries or people that are judges, and just poor judgment around that has produced a situation where if you come from less money or if you happen to be a person of color, you are far more likely in the US to be incarcerated today. You guys remember crack cocaine versus powder cocaine in the 80s and 90s. Laws were written that disproportionately punished crack cocaine versus powder cocaine. So if you were selling crack, which by the way was coming mostly from inner city areas that were predominantly people of color, you were much more likely to receive a longer jail sentence, even if it was the same amount of cocaine as some guy who's a Wall Street guy that gets pulled over with an 8-ball. And they end up, slapping his hand and letting him out. So clearly written to punish specific people. The last piece I want to touch on is that there is money in prisons. So the prison budget, the Department of Correction budget today is $182 billion. Our education budget in the US is $226 billion. We're spending almost as much money as a country on prisons as we are on educating our kids. And if we were able to shift some of that money to education, how many kids could be pulled out of the prison system? What other opportunities could exist for those children? There's clearly a school to prison pipeline, and that especially exists in areas where there's lack of opportunity for kids. So the state's built more prisons to handle overflow. Right now, today, 8% of all prisons in the US are privately owned and they are for profit. And I'm sorry, 11%, 8% of people serving time are in those prisons. That to me feels wrong. I don't know how you guys feel, but if I own a coffee shop, right? If I want to make money, what am I trying to do? Trying to get more people to drink coffee, right? If you own a prison and you're trying to make money, what do you want to do? You need more people in prison, right? So that whole concept that we should allow people to profit off the suffering of people that are serving time makes no sense to me. And it's something that we really need to look at. Then you create that budget, and anyone who's ever worked for the government will tell you, if you have a $182 billion budget, you're going to spend it. And you're going to go back next year and ask for more, right? So you start to create jobs and layers and a system that requires us to fill those prisons. And then you see people out lobbying for mandatory sentencing and things of that nature to make sure those prisons are full. This didn't happen on accident. And for it to turn around, it's going to take an intentional effort from us in order to start to move us in the right direction. So this is something that I wanted to share with you guys. Basically right now, 4 out of 5 people that get out of prison will get rearrested within 10 years. Many of those people will end up back in prison. There are countries, I pulled out Norway because Norway is pretty exceptional, where they are half the rate of recidivism than the US, but there are several other countries that are doing just as well. And I think it's important that we not try to invent the wheel and look at some of the things that are working out there. And what I can tell you guys is most of the difference is a rehabilitative approach to incarceration versus a punitive approach to incarceration. The opportunity to use that time when you have people behind bars to invest in them so that when they're back on the streets, you can choose to spend your money to just keep incarcerating them over and over, or you can make that experience better while they're serving time. This is why it's important. So if you think you're tough on crime and you say, you know what, lock those bastards up, they deserve it, put them away, okay. But 98% of people that we put behind bars are going to get out. They're going to be your neighbors, right? It's just a matter of what kind of neighbor do you want? Do you want someone who went into a cage with 3,000 other trauma-based individuals and didn't get the programming they need or the help they need to come out and be contributing members to society? Because we know how that works. We're doing it. We can see it. It's measurable. Or would you rather say, you want them to come out and be contributing members of society and have every opportunity to change their lives? I have a 19-year-old daughter that I love very much. I want people to get better when they're in prison. I don't want people running around the streets that have all this anger. But today, what we're doing is creating a situation where people are so much more likely to come out and reoffend. I'm not going to touch on this too much, but I do want to say incarceration rates create a cycle. They tend to run through families, and I'm going to get a little deeper into that in a second, what that looks like. And they impact our society on a major level. So I talked about the $182 billion budget. Think about the public strain that is, right? The safety strain on our society. And that's, you got the police forces out there. That's just the Department of Corrections I'm talking about. I'm not talking about police forces. All of this exists and could be changed in the right direction by redirecting our efforts in the prison system. I have 3 children that are here today. I'm really proud to say none of them have been arrested. I think Damien got a ticket. Yeah, Damien got a ticket once. He got in trouble. None of my kids have been arrested, right? I had 3 siblings. All 3 of my siblings continued to use drugs and alcohol their entire lives, okay? Those 3 siblings had 10 children. You want to guess how many have been in jail? 9. 9 out of 10 have been arrested and served time in jail. 9 out of 10 have had struggles with alcohol and drugs, right? So 90% failure rate, right? That's how generational this can be. One of them is a doctor. He's 17 years old, joined the Navy, went off, did 20 years, spent his entire life getting better and was successful, right? So what that tells me is those kids are not genetically flawed, right? There's nothing wrong with those kids. It's not like they were born a felon. They were bred a felon. They were raised to be felons. They were raised to get in trouble and to crave, to use drugs and alcohol to escape. Because one of them had the capacity to get out and go do something great. And I think that you could see that with most people in most situations. But it starts generationally. And my mother died of pancreatic cancer at 64. And I was in my late 20s at the time. My mother and I were not friendly, as you guys probably could guess from earlier on in my discussion. But I can tell you I was able to go to her and have a conversation and forgive her. And, she ended up growing old and being good to my kids, which was crazy. It blew me away. But she changed as a human being. And I know that the house that she came from, she had 3rd-degree burns over her entire body from when she was 2 years old. And I know the house that she came from changed her mindset so that she went and recreated that in our house. She wasn't flawed. There's nothing wrong with her in her DNA and who she is. And in most cases, I'd say the people that are serving time today in the U.S. are not flawed individuals. They have the great capacity to do amazing things, and they have capacity in the wrong situation, just like all of us do, to make poor choices. This is something I run into a lot, and I just want to touch on this quickly. Confirmation bias. Okay, who's been arrested? I'm joking. No, you don't have to raise your hand. How many of you been to prison? Okay. when I'm having this conversation with people and I start to dig into this topic, what I run into a lot is people that have not been exposed to the kind of lifestyles that most people have been exposed to that end up in prison. And so when I say confirmation bias, it's the old pull themselves up by their bootstraps argument. Well, they got to quit screwing around. I don't understand why they're doing that. And it makes a lot of sense that you don't understand why they're doing that because you didn't come from the same place they came from, right? It doesn't mean you're wrong to feel that way. And it's really hard to put yourself in someone else's shoes sometimes and look at it through the perspective of, if I didn't have loving parents, if I didn't have opportunity, if I didn't have people who cared where I was at 2 a.m. and made sure that I was doing the things I was supposed to be doing, where would I be? If I would have came from a violent neighborhood, if I would have came from a neighborhood that was under-resourced for schools, would I still be in the position that I'm in today, right? And so when I left my last organization that I won't name by name, I got in a large argument with the leadership of that organization over taking care of people. And there was a young lady who was late to work often. And I'm talking to this person who's our CFO, who is wealthy and has had everything go right for him. And he's arguing with me and he's telling me I need to go fire this young lady. She's 22 or something, right? Single mom, lives with her mother. And he's like, I want her gone. I go, well, that's a problem because I'm the COO and I'm not firing her. So, you're going to have to get over it, right? And he says, she's always 10 minutes late. And I go, you know why she's 10 minutes late, you dick? She's 10 minutes late because her mom's an ER nurse and someone died in the ER last night. And we don't pay her enough money to be able to afford daycare. So she's trying to take care of her kids, right? And you can't contemplate that or understand that because you were handed a house when you were 18 years old. You had your parents pay for your college. You were raised in a loving home with 2 parents and every opportunity. You weren't a young father, So being able to shift your focus and your perspective and look at things through someone else's eyes instead of just judging, I think can go a long way towards trying to address some of this situation. I had to talk about that because that moment really pissed me off. Like I said, first time I ever got fired. I probably speak my mind too much. So I want to touch on a couple of things, guys, and this is an eye chart, so I apologize. There are some really heavy, obvious precursors, predictors of people that are going to end up incarcerated. Obviously, the best thing to do when we talk about reducing recidivism is to not let people get arrested, right? Like get kids on the right track before they get into the system, and you can prevent a lot of the issues that we talk about. But I'm going to go through a couple of precursors. The number one is that you have prior system contact. And that's going to mean that you've been arrested in the past, you've been on probation in the past, you've in some way came in contact with it, or there's a heavy presence in your neighborhood, in your space, because the way that you're policed contributes to the arrest rate as well. Even minor incidents can lead to you being more likely to end up in prison significantly. Number two is that you had, and this is me, you had childhood exposure to incarceration, meaning my parents were incarcerated. And I was around people who were incarcerated when I was young. That is the second leading indicator. And that predicts incarceration even when you're controlling for income and crime rates. So it's very likely that if you're in a family where someone is being arrested, you're going to be arrested. That leads, what does that tell you? They probably don't have great parents going on at home. They probably have instability in the home. When you arrest a person, you really arrest a family often. There's a really cool prison ministry that we worked with last year. And what they do is they take kids that are serving time and they get letters from the people, kids whose parents are serving time. They get letters from the parents, and then we go out and buy presents for the kids from the parents. There's a hole in your life when one of your family members, especially a parent, is in prison and you're a kid, right? You have a disadvantage versus other kids in that same situation. Poverty and housing instability, so unstable housing, evictions, and homelessness are all really strong predictors. Educational disconnect, so if you start to see kids, as we talk about things we can do, right? You start to see kids being suspended, expelled. If you see chronic absenteeism, if you see them not completing high school, I never went to high school, right? You start looking at those things, it's very likely you're going to see those kids end up incarcerated. It's a much higher rate than the general population. And then this one is interesting, but neighborhood surveillance intensity. So if you are in Parker, Colorado, where we have really low crime, comparatively to some of our neighbors. Some of that might be that we have less police presence, believe it or not. And if you're in an area where there's a lot of police presence, there's a lot more likelihood you're going to get arrested, right? And you can make the argument chicken or egg, but anytime there's heavy police presence, you're going to start seeing more people put behind bars. So not something you would automatically assume, but true. And then the last one, mental health and substance abuse. And that's especially when it's paired with poverty. Because generally speaking, if you have mental health issues and you have substance abuse issues and you're poor, you don't have access to the healthcare that you need. So, these are some of the programs, the problems. These are some of the solutions that we see out there as opportunities to shift our thinking as to how we can reduce the initial stage of people being arrested. During incarceration, I'm going to be honest with you guys, I did a really cool thing with Radio for Justice about a month ago. We watched a movie called No Matter What. It was a life story of a young lady named Cassie who did 4 years in prison. Really cool event. And I felt a little out of touch because I haven't done prison time in 30 years. So I'm going to talk about the things that I'm aware of that are really, really important behind the bars. There's people that are more qualified than me to talk about what's needed. But what I can tell you today is the big ones are going to be mental health access, drug and alcohol rehab, vocational training, which I call hope, something to get out and feel like you have a way to make a living and take care of your family. Actually paying jobs behind bars. I don't know if all of you are familiar with the 13th Amendment or not, but the 13th Amendment basically says that slavery is illegal unless you've been convicted of a crime, and then it's totally fine, right? So there are plenty of places in the country where we're paying under $1, and there's places in the country where they're not paid at all to do jobs, right? It's essentially forced labor. There's actually companies that will pick locations for factories so that instead of building a factory, they'll put it in prisons to save money on the backs of people serving time. I can tell you as a man, when I was in prison, one of the most difficult things for me to get my head around was that I wasn't able to take care of my family. That was a very difficult thing to handle. And I think if you are going to serve a lot of time and we're able to provide jobs and opportunities while people are serving time, that they can send money out to their family, I think you could see a significant impact for people serving time. The other thing is that right now, if we're going to incarcerate people, we need to improve the safety behind bars. If you're going to take people off the street and say, I'm going to put you in this cell, in this cage, without against your will, then it can't be 6 times more likely you're going to suffer a violent attack versus society. It can't be 4 times more likely you're going to suffer a sexual attack versus society. If you want people to go in there and be able to have access to these programs, they need to feel safe so that they can push themselves out there and start to learn and go forward. But the very first thing many people think about when they're in prison is, how am I going to stay alive through today to make sure that I can get to that class or that program? Post-incarceration reentry programs are really powerful. In Parker, we have worked with Step 7 Ministries. I don't know if you guys are aware of them, but they have 6 homes here in Parker. And 80% of the guys in those homes are ex-convicts. They have a 93% success rate, and those guys not reoffending. Having opportunities to be around people that have been where you are and are positively moving forward in life. We work with Redemption Fitness. Redemption Road Fitness does fitness in prisons. And then upon release, a lot of these guys join gyms with other guys that have done time and have mentorship on the outside and a community of people who might understand where they came from. Very important. Some of the challenges going on right now, finding employment. This was very, very disheartening to dig into the number of jobs that an ex-convict is not allowed to get in the United States. And what some of those jobs are is crazy. There's places you can't be a bartender. There's places you can't drive a truck. There's a lot of places where you're restricted on where you can rent. I have someone who comes in my place all the time. Her husband is an ex-convict. She sneaks him in her house because he's not on their lease and they won't let him be on the lease. And so he lives in their house by getting in the back door at night. And that's just insane. He's been out. He's an electrician. He's working really hard. He's been out for several years now, but he still is not allowed to be on that lease because he has a property trespassing crime, and they won't let him be on there. Barriers to affordable housing. I already talked about the impact of homelessness on reoffending. And then one of the things that I'm really passionate about is if we're going to put job training skills in prisons, let's try to do things that are usable on the outside, right? Because it's great that we teach you how to train a dog in prison, and I think that's really positive, honestly, for the person serving time, right? Because being around animals, as we know, it's therapeutic and it's awesome. I don't know how many dog training jobs are out here. You know, I haven't looked lately. Are you hiring? Okay. So, you know, thinking of things that they can do that are actually going to give them an opportunity, a path forward when they're released from prison, I think is really important. And then, you know, the standard of proof for parole violations, to me, when we talk about policies that need to change, that needs to be at or near or at the standard for committing a new crime. I think putting someone back in prison for failing a drug test or for missing some appointments when they haven't committed a new crime and not having them have the same protection that you and I have right now to go in front of a jury and just be thrown back in prison is insane. We can do better than that. And I think that policy is something that needs to change. I also make a strong argument for ban the box. If you're not aware what that is, it's basically removing the ability to ask if someone's a felon and narrowing either the scope of that or narrowing the length of time that applies. In Colorado right now, it's 5 years. They can ask you for 5 years if you're a felon. I don't want you to wait 5 years to get a job when you get out of prison, right? So I want to challenge us to find better ways to do that. Do you have the time, Bill? Or does anyone have the time for me? I want to make sure I'm not going too long. 7:20? Man, I'm right on time. All right. Thanks for putting up with me, guys. I want to circle back to some of the things that we have worked with over at Convict Coffee. So when we think about all of this, I don't want to be doom and gloom. You know, the thing is, there's a lot of hope out there. Really, I go speak in colleges all the time to kids that are in criminal justice classes. When I talk to those kids, I always start off the same way. I'm talking to you because I have this mission that I believe in. I'm 56 years old. Maybe I'll make it. Maybe my family and I will make a difference. Maybe we won't. But here's 100 more people that might get it and understand and want to go out and make a change, right? So understanding, you know, who you vote for, understanding what policies you push for, understanding what kind of how you maybe perceive felons when they're out on the street and giving people an honest, fair shake. Any one of us can make that decision today. And if we make enough people make that decision, we can start to move it forward. So Convict Coffee, I told you, came from this. I can tell you guys I had hit bottom. I was as miserable a human being as I wanted to die. I was suicidal. I was alcoholic. I was drug addict. I had smoked weed every single day that I was free for 42 years. I had drank almost as many days, and I had done other things as well. And my families had fallen apart, and I had lost touch with people that were really important to me. And at that very moment, at the very bottom, I said, fuck it, I'm doing something crazy. Who cares if it doesn't work, right? If you're willing to say, I don't want to live anymore, then go for it. Swing for the fences. People, not everyone is going to get it, but the people that are your tribe, the people that are open will understand. And we built this incredible community over here. So this number could be updated to 150,000. We opened in April of 2024, April 16th of 2024. But we've supported all of the causes you see on this slide. Tarani is on there because we're an opportunity cafe for them, and they donate to causes that we ask them to donate to, which is really cool. But quickly, today in the top left, Fully Liberated Youth, we have a program in our shop called Quarter for a Quarter. So for 3 months, every 3 months, we give 25 cents of every drink that anyone buys, and that's where most of our fundraising goes. We give it out of our profit to that charity. Today, it's Fully Liberated Youth. They're in Denver. They work with kids that are justice involved to help get them out of the system through mentorship. Really powerful program. Next to that is Redemption Roasters. Those are ladies in the Denver Women's Correctional Facility that roast coffee. All of our cold brew is brewed with that coffee. They have a very high success rate in lowering recidivism with the women that go through that program. Just doing something positive and creative and getting out of your cell can go a long way towards moving you forward. It's also a very good cold brew. We roast all of our other beans by ourselves. Treasure House of Hope, you may have heard of. We sell their breads. Those breads are made by women in a domestic violence shelter, a mommy and me shelter, and a sober home. They get to stay in that home for free, and they bake twice a week. A lot of those women are justice involved. One of our good friends there, April, graduated the program, and now for 2 years she's been helping run it. Most of the people that run that program were previously justice involved. Charlie Joe Chai, I want to shout him out. He's focused on kids in trafficking, 140 kids out of trafficking since 2020 when he started his organization. Very cool program. In the middle there is the Juvenile Assessment Center. The first place and maybe worst place I was ever arrested was San Leandro, California. And I was put in the juvenile hall there, and there were 700 kids in that facility. And it might have been the most violent facility I was ever in. I was 13 years old. In the state of Colorado, there's less than 1,000 kids that are incarcerated right now. So I was in one facility in California that had 700. So what Juvenile Assessment Center does is work with kids and try to say, they advise the courts, what are some other alternatives to incarcerating these kids? Is there an issue in the house? Is this something where the state needs to come in and put them in foster care? What is the base problem that keeps continuing to have this kid get in trouble? Step 7 Ministries I touched on, but there's 6 sober homes. They're a faith-based program, really high success rate. Valley Hope of Parker, I'm sure you guys have heard of them. They've been in Parker for 30 years. Drug and alcohol rehab. They do detox center as well. It is a full medical facility, and it is a 501c3. Redemption Road Fitness, I touched on them as well. And then in addition to that, all the art in our shop is done by people that are incarcerated today. So if you come visit the shop, you can see that. We're working on a program now, thank you, Michael, to find ways to expand that program and actually get more money back to the incarcerated individual. We would like to be able to sell their art for them so that they can support their families on the outside through that program as well. And then I didn't touch too much on this, and I'll be quick, but I talk a lot about conscious capitalism. And when we think about what we can do as a country, right, to make things better, vote with your dollar. Think about who you're supporting when it comes. Many of us, how many of you guys buy coffee? Yeah, nice. Okay. Many of us buy coffee every day, right? So who gets your money? When you go sit in a drive-thru, are you at Dutch Bros? Are you at Starbucks? The Starbucks CEO makes in 1 hour what a full-time employee makes in a year. He makes over 10,000 times the lowest paid employee in the company. If you compare that to when I was a kid, a CEO made about 14 times their employee. Now the average is 500. The Dutch Brothers CEO is worth $4 billion and pays minimum wage. That's capitalism. If they're standing right here, they're going to be like, that's capitalism, baby. I can do it. If they'll pay me, I can take it. And they're 100% right. But you know the other side of capitalism is supply and demand. So if you don't go to their drive-thru, they will change. They will do more things in their community. They will choose to pay people better. If they realize that the decision set that their consumer is using to decide who they're supporting is what are you doing in your community? How are you treating your people? Then they will change. Our base pay for employees is 20 in town right now. I'm trying to get to 30 by the end of the year for baristas. Starbucks pays 13 right now, tip minimum to start. With tips, that's 71,000 a year. My goal is to be 93,000 a year by the end of the year, which would be $30 an hour base. And we can do that because I don't need to be worth $100 million, right? I have no interest in it, right? I did years and years and years of making assholes rich. I can't go be that asshole now, right? So I need to make sure that I live my life in a way that reflects that my values, right? And that my employees are able, I can look my employees in the eye when I walk by them on the street. We've never lost an employee, and that's really important to me. Our long-term goal is to franchise to ex-convicts. So if you picture a future for Convict Coffee, we're opening our 2nd location now up in Evans. My family and I are building what we're going to call sort of our R&D circle, right? 10 restaurants that we run where we develop the menu, we develop all of the marketing tools, everything else. And then I want to build a program where if you're an ex-convict and you've done the right things, we're going to go ahead and provide you the opportunity to start your own business with us helping fund you. And then you buy us out and it's your restaurant, right? Because I think lived experience is really important. If you're going to have someone represent you and be in a building called Convict Coffee, there should probably be a convict in there, right? We have some bad kids that work for us, but no convicts. But that is, they're right there. That is part of our plan as well, right? Is to be able to offer opportunities for convicts in the workforce. And I want to say this because this was asked of me at CU Denver when I spoke, and I'll wrap up on this. Why Convict Coffee? We were told to call them incarcerated individuals, right? We don't use convict. That's a demeaning term. I understand that. No one ever walked in my cell and said, hey, incarcerated individual, make your fucking bed, right? That's not how they talk to you. That's not how we talk to each other. You know, I think it's important to be real. If you walk in my shop, I think you're going to see an experience that we're really trying to make a difference. We hold each other accountable. And, you know, I texted my son joking on Thanksgiving. I said, man, if we opened on Thanksgiving, we'd kill it. We'd make so much money. And he texted back and goes, you fucking sell out. He goes, we're not opening on Thanksgiving, dude. We're not asking our employees to work on Thanksgiving. He goes, I'm going to start calling you Brian Nickel, which is the Starbucks CEO. So I want to thank you guys for coming out. I apologize for the profanity. It's really important for me to speak authentically and be who I am. And it means a lot that you would take the time to listen. And I can tell you, when I opened in Parker, Colorado, I was told there weren't people that were going to support us. And I have been so blessed and so fortunate to see how many people come through our doors every day. So thank you, and I'll open it up for questions.